The next speaker is the staff product designer who's passionate about hacking user perception, designing developer tools, and creating design systems for startups and large companies. And they build products that customers love. So please welcome Mustafa Kurtuldu, who will talk about user-fudged experiences, how users improve tomorrow's experience with today's tools. Mustafa, the stage is yours. I'm out.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? I want to start doing karaoke now. I can hear my own voice. Hello, my name is Mustafa. I'm a product designer at Meta. Previous to that, I worked at Twitter. Previous to that, I worked at Google, so I've been in big tech for quite a long time. Design industry for about 24 years now. What I'd like to talk to you about today is this concept I've been developing called user-fudged experiences. So the first question is, what is a user-fudged experience? It's a very strange term. The way I would describe it is when you see users improvising with your products or services, usually in a hacky way. So you've designed your product to do one thing, and they're using it to do something else. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry, by the end of the talk it will. I have lots of examples. But the talk is broken down into two main parts. The first one, we're going to talk about direction, understanding what users want. And then moving on from that, we'll talk about perception, how to help users get to where we want them to get to. And so let's first look at some direction. And so way back when, the life of a designer, you'll be designing something in Photoshop, Illustrator, or any of these classic design tools. You'll create a logo piece of design, and you'll call it Final One. And everything will be perfect until someone asks for a change. And so you call it Final Two, Final Three, Final Four, Final Five, Final Help, please God help, please help me. And this is the way that we've been designing for a very long time. And so when I was a student 24 plus years ago, the way we used to store things were these big disks called zip disks. Now the problem with zip disks is that they often failed. So you'd have to save multiple versions just to be on the safe side. Years later, we had USB drives, which were great, but you always lost them and could also fail. Around about the time, Hotmail had like 5 megabytes of email space, so we'd email designs to ourselves, but obviously that was very limiting. But this is how we managed the storage of our actual designs. And that was until 2004, Google launched Gmail, which had 1 gigabyte of space. And this was like revolutionary for us. And so collectively as an industry, especially students, we went, what if? And so it was noticed that Gmail users would save really large attachments to their drafts and never send the files. Very weird behavior. It's not what email drafts were designed for. And this is what we call a user-fudged experience. Basically, users were designing cloud storage before cloud storage became a thing. And so when you see users doing these weird things, that's when you need to start teasing out, why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? Because oftentimes, they're actually designing the thing that you should be working on. And so there was this quote from this founder. He said, I could never find my USB drives with me. I kept losing them. I was drowning in email attachments of shared files. I started hacking something together. And then I thought, if I needed this, other people might do as well. Can anyone guess who said this? Everyone's so quiet. Start screaming, please. You're alive. It's alive. The CEO of Dropbox. And so oftentimes the CEO would discover a problem they have, and they think, okay, if we were to scale this, how many other people could we actually solve this problem for? And like Dropbox changed everything. Like I remember when I first used it back in 2008, like it was revolutionary. Like you know when an innovation has happened when everything that came before it seems really archaic and old. So if you look at, say, like the iPhone 7, phones before that, it was like 30% screen and 70% input device. The iPhone was 90% screen and 10% input device. And that was so revolutionary. But the moment you saw the iPhone, you realized, hang on, everything else is like in the dark ages. And so Dropbox really changed everything for us. And so the life of a designer went from this to this. We weren't carrying the files, but we just pushed everything up into the cloud. And that was cool. We're not carrying all these devices with us. But the underlying problem still remained the same. Like we're still trying to manage all these files. Nothing has actually changed. We're just pushing the problem somewhere else. And oftentimes, when innovation happens, the first step is we just iterate on an existing solution. So it's like, okay, the problem is people want to carry lots of files. Instead of asking, why do people want to carry lots of files? And so we push that problem on an iterated solution. Now, how many people have heard about jobs to be done? All right, cool, that's good. It's improving. And so the technique in jobs to be done is you ask this question of, when you're seeing a user doing something interesting or weird, you ask them, tell me the last time you did whatever activity. What did you do? Or what other things did you use? So it could be, I used a zip disk, I used a USB drive, I used whatever. That's when you're trying to tease out what they actually are doing. And so you can imagine someone will say, I'm trying to share my files with clients, with engineering, or for my portfolio. And then you start realizing the key word is share. That's what someone's trying to do, as opposed to storing lots of files and creating lots of names for files, which is the behavior. Now, in the design sprint methodology, we have how might we. You might say, how might we make it easier to share files with stakeholders as a starting point? One of the inventors of like jobs to be done, Tony Ulrich, he came up with this concept called a desired outcome statement. And so you try to condense something into one statement, but you break the statement down into small parts. And so the first part you say, minimize, improvement. What is the thing that you're trying to actually improve? Try and come up with words. Sometimes it's minimize, decrease, increase, depending on what you're actually trying to design. But it's just, that's the improvement. The next part is the time it takes. That's the metric. How are you going to measure that you've actually made this improvement? And that could be time, it could be any metric, depending on the product that you're designing. The outcome, to find my files. What is the goal of this? What's the thing that's actually going to happen? Not the goal, but what's the outcome when you minimize this time? And the final part is the goal clarify. The whole point of this whole exercise is the sharing. That's the clarifier. And so together, we say, minimize the time it takes to find my files for sharing. And you can have multiple ones of these. It's just, what it does is it helps everyone in your team see that up on the board. Okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish for this maybe feature or for this design sprint that you're doing or whatever that you're actually working on. You're trying to condense it down into a statement that's measurable and understandable by everyone. I see people taking pictures. You want to take more pictures? Or are you just taking pictures of me? I will make jokes just to see if you're alive. And so the life of the designer, we went from this to this. Figma's selling point is nothing great is made alone. Like we had Sketch, we had other design tools before, and Figma didn't do anything radically different. But the main selling point was about sharing. And so we went from all these files, from that to that. And so like version control in design has been so difficult. Like I've seen so many tools come and go, it just wouldn't work. Even like Dropbox and Google Drive kept failing designers because of the way design files were made. But Figma has changed everything and it's so revolutionary. Now, if you imagine, could you go back to the way we used to work, like 10 years ago? It would be very hard. That's when you know innovation has happened. And so if you look at jobs to be done, you compare these different products. You would never think that Figma was a competitor of Dropbox, was a competitor of Gmail, with emailing yourself USB drives and zip disks. You would always, when you look at competitors, you look at your own product categories, when really you need to be looking at product behaviors of the user. What are people actually doing? Those are your real competitors, because people are finding these products to do a specific job that they're trying to accomplish. And users were hiring each one of these products or services to do that specific job. And so it's quite mind-blowing. You would never think that these were competitors. Now, let's talk about milkshakes, because I'm hungry. So McDonald's wanted to increase the sales of their milkshakes. So they thought, if we change the flavor, that surely would improve sales. And so they did that thing that companies often do, which is really dangerous. They did a focus group. Now, focus groups are really, really dodgy, because you have a group of people in the room, you ask them questions, the loudest person in the room will speak. everyone else will nod, and then you take that. It's like you're abandoning your responsibility to actually tease these things out, to genuinely find out what people want. And so when you ask people, give me guidance, what do you want? Oftentimes they'll do that. I want a pizza with pineapple and chocolate and cheese. It's completely meaningless, and it won't help you. Also, the previous speaker mentioned that when you ask people what they want, they'll tell you what they think you want to hear. That's a very common behavior, as opposed to like observing what people are doing. And so McDonald's took the advice, and very little happened. And so they went back and thought, okay, let's hire a famous consultant called Clay Christensen. And what Clay and his team did is they went to a McDonald's inside, and for 18 hours a day, they observed people buying milkshakes. They looked at the time that they bought them, who they were with, if they bought anything else, and what happened afterwards. Sorry, I like to put photographies off there. What they found was 50% of milkshakes were sold before 8:30 in the morning. And that's a very, very weird thing. Like, when you think about milkshakes, it's like the summertime, lunch, break, snack. Why would you buy it when it's cold and dark in the early hours of the morning? The other thing that they discovered was it was the only thing that people bought. They were alone, they'd buy the milkshake, and they'd drive off. Very strange behavior. And so Clay and his team went back the next day, but this time they waited outside to catch the people as they came out. And Clay asked a very interesting question. He said, I'm having a real problem with your behavior here. Like, what are you doing at 8:30 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning buying a milkshake? What's going on? And people couldn't really answer the question because it was very confusing. Like, what am I doing here? So Clay said, okay, let's take a few steps back. Think about the last time you needed to buy a milkshake. What did you buy? What did you do? Because again, it's about teasing out what is the job they're hiring this product to actually accomplish. And so some people said, I bought a banana, but it was over too quickly. Others said I bought a donut or a Snickers bar, but I felt guilty afterwards. Others said I bought a bagel, but it's hard, the bagels are really dry and it's hard to spread cream cheese while you're trying to drive your car at the same time. What they were doing is they had a long drive to work, they needed to stay engaged, and they wanted to remain full by lunchtime. And each one of these products, they were hiring to do that. But all these products failed them. The milkshake, on the other hand, it's quite thick, you can hold it in your hand, and it takes a long time to consume. And so these users were basically hiring a milkshake to be a long-consuming breakfast, which is not what the milkshake was designed for at all. And so once McDonald's realized this, they thought, okay, we can move the milkshake machines to the front, we make prepaid card machines to get customers in and out, we'll make it thicker so it takes longer to consume, and this increased sales by 7x. Now at this point, everyone who I've shown this to says, yeah, but when I go to a McDonald's, none of the milkshake machines actually work. That's a different problem. But this actually, just understanding what the user behavior was, or what the people were trying to accomplish, they actually improved their sales. And like you see these stories of user-fudged experiences everywhere, of companies trying to discover what people are doing and what the weird behaviors of their products. Like for example, WhatsApp. The founder of WhatsApp, he bought a new iPhone because it was like the new thing. And he went to the gym, but he missed a lot of phone calls. And so what he did, he thought, okay, if I created an app that will share my status with my friends, they will know that I'm not available. And so he released this product, and no one downloaded it. A few months later, Apple just happened to release something called push notifications. And so they thought, okay, if we did every time my status updates, we'll send a push notification. What they discovered was people were sending these joke messages. I'll be on my way, I'm in the bathroom, or whatever. It's all like comedic. They realized then that it wasn't the statuses that people wanted to do, they wanted to send each other messages. And the moment they added that as a core part of the product, you know WhatsApp today is worldwide used. Again, discovering what users are trying to accomplish. Another example is when YouTube, originally it was supposed to be a dating site, not a video, like a general video site. And so when they worked on it, it was supposed to be like Hot or Not, where people could rate each other's videos, but no one uploaded anything because people were too scared. They didn't like the idea. As soon as they turned into a general video site, suddenly YouTube is the product of today. So again, understanding what people are trying to do, and you will do this, sometimes accidentally. But using the jobs to be done methodology, you can start teasing this out naturally from people to really get what are you trying to accomplish. And then we have the story of secure passwords. We oftentimes force our users to try and remember these really complicated passwords because under the guise it's secure. You've seen the XKCD cartoons, very famous for this. But when users can't remember passwords, what do? Anyone? They write them down. This is Sky News broadcasting their passwords live. This is the Super Bowl broadcasting their passwords live. And this is a French TV channel. They write them down. That's really bad for security. And so when I worked at Google, I was working on Chrome, we had this idea of like, how can you create second factor authentication that using what people have with them already? And so instead of just having a nubby device, USB key, you could use your phone. So you scan the QR code and then your phone is authenticated. And if that failed for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, you could connect your phone to your laptop and you could authenticate like that. And like as a result, we increased successful logins by a third. So just making it easier, like using the things that people have rather than forcing them to carry something else. Like augmenting their existing experience oftentimes works much better. And also Chrome implemented a password manager, which was really successful. Again, security is really important, but trying to get people to be machines is a dangerous way to go. And what happens when things go wrong? Like at one point, all of these companies were like the industry leaders. Kodak, Nokia, Tower Records. I haven't seen one of those in years. Blockbuster Video. Interesting story at Blockbuster Video. A small startup went to them and said, why don't we put your films online? And they laughed at them at the office. That company was Netflix. You think like, this is what can happen. Xerox should be the most richest company in Silicon Valley. Like they pretty much developed graphical user interfaces based on other people's research, but generally they had it until Apple came along and borrowed everything that they have. But if you're not looking at the future, this is what will happen to you. So you have to always think like, how can we innovate? So now you have an idea of teasing out things from users and why that's important. Let's look at how we actually get people to where we want them to get to. And so when a person meets an object, they go through 3 phases: affordance, instruction, and feedback. And now Don Norman, he calls the instruction signifier. And that, to me, it's just semantics. The word instruction makes more sense to me, but I'll explain each one of these steps. So the first step, when you see an object, something about the object says that it can be engaged with. Usually it's to do with the shape of the human body. If it's small, you can pick it up. If it's the size of a door frame, you can walk through it. If it's eye height, it means this is how you orientate yourself. There's something about the ergonomics of the object that's telling you, I can be used. That's the affordance. The instruction is how something should be used. A button, a label, things like that. Maybe a lever. It's saying this is where you actually engage with the object. And the feedback is what happens once something's, a task or an action is being given. It might be sound, it might be lights. There's something about it that's, okay, don't worry, I've taken your action, I'm going to do something with it, and actually perform the task. I see people taking pictures. Any more takers? Okay. And so example is a mouse. The size of a mouse is a human hand. Now, you'll see many objects throughout history, like there's like a tablet that you can find in the British Museum from Babylon from like 20,000 years ago. It's the same with the human hand. Like this is like something that's existed for centuries. Like ergonomics, when it's the size of a human hand, naturally people will actually pick it up. So the shape of the mouse, I can move this with my hand. The instruction, where the buttons are, where it's positioned, is telling you where to orientate it naturally without telling you how to use it. And the feedback will be the sound, the clicks, or lights. An elevator panel, again, it's like usually eye height level. And so it tells you orientate yourself in that direction. The buttons, the label, the emboss, embevel, this is like where you actually do it. And then the sound or light will say, okay, your action's been taken. Now again, it's worth noting that it's not good to be too dogmatic with this, because there's certain cases where the affordance and the instruction are merged. So you could say that the affordance and instruction could be the handle, and the feedback maybe the heat of the coffee. Again, it's not being too dogmatic. It's just thinking as a framework of when you're designing anything, especially in the digital space, how do people know it can be used? How do they know where to use it? and how will they know when an action's been taken and received? Now, what happens when things go wrong? Usually, it's not the affordance, it's the instruction where the errors happen. So in the first one, it says, just place the cups inside, just press the black button. Someone's obviously burnt their hand many times putting a coffee cup in there. And when you see sticky note paper, that's usually a telltale sign something's gone wrong. The second one says, do not pull or push. It's a door. I don't know why, but that's a big problem. And like the final one, this is like a machine in a coffee shop. And this is a very sophisticated machine, but obviously every time someone's trying to make the coffee, the customer's like, where do I pay? Where do I put my card? And they've gone, you put your card here, here. And so the instruction is really, really key to actually make people know how to use the machine. Because when people don't, they feel kind of stupid. And it's not their fault. It's the fault of the designer who didn't create a proper instruction for them to actually how to use the machine. And so if you're building physical products and users are using sticky note paper, you know something's wrong. Now, when Google were trying to design continuous payment onboarding, so like when you, like Uber or things, apps like that, when you scan a credit card and it continues to take payments, they had to design like the standards of this. And so you see the steps, the person goes to the settings, they give permission, they scan their credit card, and then they're onboarded. Now, the instruction says, hold the credit card here, it will scan automatically. What do you think users did? They did exactly what they were told. But it's not just them. This is a user trying to onboard an Apple Watch because it says place the watch here. And it's like, no, okay, let's try another way. We maybe have to do it flat. And then they have to be told, no, you have to pick up the phone and scan the watch like that. And so what we think is obvious for us when we're designing things isn't always obvious to our users. That's why user testing is really important. Because to actually see the product in people's hands and how they behave makes a huge difference. Now, designing recognizable UI, that's what this is about. How do people understand how to use things? Because when you think about it, all design is sculpted in contrast. And so when you have a block of text, it's really hard to read. And so you start sculpting the contrast between elements. The title will be bigger, the introduction line might be in bold, you might do indentation. You're sculpting contrast. The spaces in between highlight the important things. And that's common in the arts. In music, we do that. When we make space in between the sound, it starts changing the rhythm and the flow. The absence of sound enhances the sound. And so that's basically what design is. You're sculpting the contrast so people know, okay, this big red button is different because everything around it is white. So people focus on that thing. So it's all about sculpting contrast. And you have like the Gestalt principles, which are a series of principles that try to explain why human beings group things in certain ways. And so you see this row of stars. Like the top row, we see that as one square, when really they're individual items. And below that, we see rectangles, when really, again, they're just individual stars. Because we're using proximity, the space between it, we're sculpting the contrast so that people can see these items are related. And people will make these natural groupings. That's why in UI design, we always put things which are close together. We put things which are related to each other close together. We don't mix and match. Because human beings will make the assumption that each one of these rows are all relatable items. And so we can use that, the way people actually perceive things, we can use that to our advantage in design. Then we have common fate. When you see a group of things moving together, we see it as one body. So a flock of birds is the common thing. So like when we're using animation and motion, again, we want to use these principles, like when someone taps a button, all relatable things coming together, not from different spaces and different places. Because we want to meet people where they are and where their mental model is. But how does the human eye work? And so we have these two things in our brain called the amygdala. They trigger our fight or flight mechanism. They're the green walnuts. Because way back when we were on the savannah, our ancestors who survived were the ones who had hypersensitive periphery. They'll see something coming, and then they'll run away. The ones that didn't died. And so human beings have this natural hypersensitive periphery when we see something moving. Obviously, we don't have the same problem today, but the amygdala is still very sensitive, especially when it comes to fear. That's why in newspapers, we're triggered by fear much more easily, and also emotion. And so like the University of Toronto did a study where they found users reacted much more positively with objects which were animated versus not. Because again, it's using like the periphery and the human eye and how it actually works. And so what that means is all motion needs to be intentional. Like we can't just have random things. Because too much motion, it causes a lack of focus. Now you see on websites, things will shift and move about. It's really, really like distracting and people just switch off. Whereas too little motion causes something called change blindness. Now there's a glitch on this image every few seconds. Something's changing. Can anyone notice what it is? It's the engine. And there's an experiment where you can actually see multiple versions of this. But when a website is loading the first time, glitches will happen. And so like you want to make sure that we're not having change blindness. Like one example of change blindness, Google, when they were doing their hotel comparison site way back when, they noticed users will tap on this button and it would add hotels to their shortlist. But because the users didn't notice the shortlist, they'll tap it again. So they kept clicking, unclicking, clicking, unclicking. And so to solve this, what Google did was you have this really exaggerated animation to confirm to the user that this is saved. Now, from an engineering performance perspective, why would you add this kind of animation? But from a usability perspective, it really worked. Again, it's like that feedback mechanism, using motion intentionally. Then we have what we call the pendulum of recognizability. When you're designing something, it's very natural for designers to want to create something new because we want to own this thing rather than having something that looks like material design every single time in our portfolio. But there's an advantage to actually using things which are familiar because people will know automatically how to use them. But when you want to create something new, it's oftentimes when everything that exists is flawed. And so there's an expectation of how you actually introduce this. And so when pull to refresh was invented, it was on Twitter. The engineer was trying to think out how can we show the person that once they've scrolled beyond a certain point, that new content will come, they just have to keep scrolling. And so to begin with, it was just a button. Refresh this, and then new content will come. And then eventually he said, okay, if we just got rid of the button, just have it as a gesture. So you have the arrow, pull down to refresh, last updated. And over time, piece by piece, each one of these things were taken away because it became a natural behavior. But when you're introducing a new pattern, onboarding is a must. It's like when you want to introduce something new, there's an expectation that you have to teach people how to use this. And what's crazy about this experience is once this became industry standard, apps that didn't have pull to refresh felt broken. And so it changed and created a whole new standard as a result. So that's introduce a new pattern. You always have to onboard people. But when it comes to familiar, so when I was at Chrome, you can install websites, they're called progressive web apps. This was the UI that you would see. It says add to home screen, add cancel. And most users didn't understand what that meant. It's like, what is that? And so we thought, okay, what's the mental model of users? It's like you think Apple has educated people that stores, you have a title, description, and images. So we redesigned the UI to look just like a storefront. And that helped double engagement for some of our partners. Because it's like you're meeting the people where they are. Like you're relying on what a user's expectation of like behavior and like the patterns that you're using. Now let's talk about some navigation. And so when you're designing navigation, buttons should always look inviting, the contrast should be clear. So remember, affordance, instruction, feedback. That's a really important thing about buttons. Now, designers, we like designing things elegantly in like these flat design tools. But these buttons, users don't often know that they're buttons. The fat, clunky ones, people do recognize. And this was like a study done by UX Movement. So again, it's like being obvious is more important than necessarily being elegant. Their function should be precise. Now, here comes the part. Does anyone in the room can speak Japanese? I've been asking this question for years. No one says yes. So this user on Twitter asked an interesting question. And they said, why is the save icon a vending machine? This user's never seen a floppy disk before. And so when you're using iconography as a key part of your navigation, you have to make sure that it's really obvious, like the instructions really clear and clear to people. Because image and metaphors change with time. Like, why is that a save? Why is that a vending machine? So iconography is very dangerous when you use it on its own. Likewise, Outlook with the exception of the delete icon, the delete button, none of their buttons, icon buttons which had labels, were engaged with the exception of power users. The moment they added labels to their buttons, engagement shot up. Again, there's no, this is the danger of design tools. They encourage us to design these elegant UIs as if they're posters, as opposed to things which are being used. That's why user testing is so important. The moment you put something down in front of someone and their mind goes blank, you know there's a problem with the instruction. And so relying solely on iconography, especially in an international world where visual metaphors can mean many different things, is very, very risky. Now we have hidden UX. You're trying to select a piece of text. You keep trying to select it. This isn't how you're supposed to use the keyboard on iPhone. What you're supposed to do is hold down the space bar and the whole keyboard becomes a trackpad. But no one knows how to use this. Again, if you've got important parts of your conversion are hidden, users are not going to engage with it. It's a very risky thing to be doing. But likewise, you have what we call delightful UX. So from the iPhone 8 onwards, you can configure the logo to actually do an action. It's called the back tap. So you could tap it, opens your camera or whatever. Now this is delightfully hidden. It's not a core part of the experience. It's fine, and in a way, hiding some things is great for physical products especially, because people think, oh, the product becomes new again because they've discovered this new action that they can do. But it's a fine line. If there's a core part of your action, don't hide it. It's very risky if you do. Now, I spoke about visual feedback and giving reassurance. It's really, really critical. So when a user sees a button, they tap the button, they get enraged by the button because nothing happens, and they tap it again because maybe it didn't work right the first time. And this is a very common pattern. When there is no visual feedback or to tell the person that an action or task has been taken. And in some systems, when you press the button again, it restarts the system all the way from the beginning. And so that's very, very common. So giving visual feedback is really critical. Like in material design, they use the ripple, very obvious, very stylized. You don't necessarily just have to do that. When the designer of the Apple keyboard for the iPhone, he said, originally he had this transition where keys were coming in and out, but over time he started reducing the transition to the point where it's just like a typewriter, a clank. And that was sufficient enough. It was obvious enough that users know when a key has been pressed. So you don't have to do like a stylized motion. The key thing is, do people understand that there's feedback, that something has happened, that the system has taken the action? Now we talk about loading. And so when you do an animation, oftentimes, what you should do is you stagger animation, you slow it down, and then you build it up really fast towards the end. And if possible, you add what I call delightful details, little small triggers that will distract users long enough for your system and site to load. It's really critical that you can do that. Because when we design loading bars, the purest way of doing it, when 60% is loaded, we show 60% on a bar. But people don't perceive all time the same. Really, what we should do is when you show 40%, you have load much more than that. And this is how Microsoft actually does it. The loading time is often exaggerated, just because towards the end, people's patience start weaning, so you start moving it much faster. And so the doctor of UX who came up with this idea, he said, logic behind it is not keeping progress linear. Not every 10% or 10-minute block is perceived the same. So you shouldn't be purist about it. You shouldn't be shipping exactly what your code is doing. Like one example of this, YouTube, they have this progress bar that animates towards the top, and it staggers. That's all fake. It has nothing to do with the loading of the actual site. And so it's like this anticipation just before it pops and loads. And so the best practice for loading, this is based on research which I did while I was at Google, is loading a blank screen is really bad. People don't know what's coming. Having a spinner is okay, but the problem with spinners is they don't tell you when something is coming along. Skeleton screens are cool, but the problem with skeleton screens is gray boxes are perceived with being broken. The better approach is you use image placeholder replacements. So a pixelated image, you replace it with a high quality one. The moment you have something to load, you show it. So if it's a system font, show that first and then replace it. Adding metadata so people know what kind of content is coming. So it's like title, article, date, or things of that nature. Again, it's you want to reassure the user that something is coming. So in summary, we need to think about the direction. We need to understand why are users struggling? What are they trying to accomplish? You want to tease out their goals, like using how might we's or other sort of design thinking methodologies. Desired outcome statements help orientate entire teams together so they're all going towards the same common goal. And like the jobs to be done methodology is really, really effective. Observing users, teasing out what they're trying to do. And then we want to talk about perception, like affordance, instruction, feedback. When you're designing something, can you honestly say that the instruction is clear? And the best way to do that is by putting it in front of users to test it and see how people react and respond. Thinking about recognizable UI, thinking about how the human eye works. Think about navigation, friction, and intentional motion. And so we ask, what is the user-focused experience? And so in the beginning, I said it's when users improvise with our products or services in an unexpected way or a hacky way. But the more positive way of framing it is when you see users improvise tomorrow experiences with today's tools. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you for the amazing talk.
Thank you.
We have some time for Q&A,
Yeah.
if you're up for it.
Yeah, sure.
For example, 3 questions. Let's aim for that. The first one goes as follows. Onboarding becomes the process by which design becomes familiar. Do you think with great onboarding process, we can elevate the user experience in the product?
When it comes to onboarding, oops, is that me? When it comes to onboarding, I was around when material design was first being worked on. And so the first version of onboarding, they had these 3 different categories, like recommendations, especially for Android apps. And then we put it out into the wild. What we found was onboarding, like you have these menus of steps. This is why the app should be used. This is what you can do. Oftentimes people just skip those things. So we found like the most effective onboarding became where you're actually teaching the person how to do with like these really clever hints. So if it's a note-taking app, you leave the app blank with the encouragement to add the first note, rather than, hello, this is a note-taking app. These are all the amazing things you can save and do. So you're encouraging people to actually do the actions of the onboarding. And so that part is really, really important. I just want to make sure I'm answering the question. Do you think? Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, cool.
I guess so. Thank you. So the next question is, where are the stop signs to using animation regarding accessibility?
Is that me?
I don't know. Wait a sec. Okay.
I think when it comes to accessibility, again, you have to be careful when you're animating stuff. I mean, you don't want to go too crazy, especially when it comes to accessibility where people have certain eye conditions. But really, you can only get to there with testing. But motion is one lever that you can use to educate users on how to do things. There are other different ways of doing it. And I think it's worth working with an accessibility expert to tell you, especially like if you're using screen readers and things of that nature, to understand what are the other things to encourage people to use and engage with your system. But like motion isn't like a one-stop shop. I lost my MC.
So this should be a backup.
Hello?
Good? Okay.
Cool.
Can you hear me, by the way? Some technical difficulties. I don't think so.
I can't hear you.
You want to share one?
Yeah.
Okay. We will share the mic.
We do karaoke together.
Yeah, we can do it. So the last question. How can corporate B2B products with outdated UX come out of the fudge state? When design really does not impact revenue, how would you approach stakeholders?
How can corporate products with outdated UX come out with the fudge state when users design well, the first thing you do is you show what happens when you don't do it. You show the companies which have failed with time. User testing, like you need to have like a very strong user testing, user research part of your organization. I think that's the key thing. And so sometimes when you're pitching stuff, if you're an agency, you do like let's find out what the real problem is. So you might do a small pilot study to figure out what people are doing. And the data usually sells things to people. I think having evidence is always the best approach. And again, like showing case studies of what can go wrong, like Blockbuster is one of the best examples, I think. Because the problem with big companies is they get used to like one part of their revenue being like a stable horse and they think it'll be there forever, but that's not the case. I think at Meta, on our Meta campus in Mountain View, we have like the Meta logo, but behind it is like the Sun Systems. That was like the previous company, and it's there as a reminder of what can actually happen if you don't start innovating, if you stop innovating, like what your future will actually be. And I think using those case studies is actually quite powerful. But yeah, user research is the best thing to actually do, I reckon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, and for sharing the mic as well. Mustafa, everyone, please, a round of applause. And we have a small gift for you from the team of organizers. So enjoy the tea and some artwork of yourself. So thank you, Mustafa.